Hi, this is Pat Gahn, manager of the Ubuntu server and OpenStack team. We're here today with the Ubuntu Developer Summit 2014. We've got Serge and Stefan and Scott Mosier and Tycho and Chuck here to talk to you guys about the plans for 1410 with regards to containers. So Serge, Stefan, I'll let you guys take it from here.
Okay, hi, I'm Serge. So this is a little bit late for a planning session. We have a blueprint of what we're currently planning to do. I pasted the link in the IRC channel, so you can look at that, and that pretty much should match the stuff that's in our Etherpad. I think we delivered quite a few features in the last cycle or the last few cycles. In a sense, it would have been nice to slow down the cycle and spend some time dealing with bugs and usability. And so one of the first things I want to spend time on this cycle is working with LXC users like Maz and Juju and anyone else on what usability shortcomings there are for them. For instance, they might really want to have unprivileged containers, but they really want to use file systems, non-file systems in there. That's something Maz wants to do. So working around whatever shortcomings there are there, first off, identifying them is something I want to spend some time on. And like I say, addressing bugs, because LXC went through quite a heap of change from Precise through to Trusty. The next thing, and this throws the not wanting to do things, big things out the window, is a checkpoint and restart. And so we really want to, in this cycle, and especially early in this cycle, get at least basic LXC checkpoint and LXC restart of a container that isn't doing any fancy things yet. Get that working. And Tycho is the one right now doing the work on that. It's already sent out a patch to address the file systems that Ubuntu uses by default that Creo wasn't expecting. And the next step is going to be, we're going to have to deal with Creo does checkpoint what C group you're in, but it doesn't checkpoint or reconstruct the C group hierarchy. So it can't move you in there unless someone else does that for you. So that's going to be the next step.
So can I ask you a basic question? Creo,
yes.
You're talking about the checkpoint and restart in user.
In user space, right?
In user space, and you're calling it Creo. I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, you can go to creo.org. That's just what they call it.
Cool.
Their wiki tells you how to pronounce it.
I had no idea.
Oh, really? How do you pronounce it?
That's what they have it's Creo. Yeah, you're saying it
okay.
Right. They have the phonetics on there and stuff.
Okay, Tycho, did you want to say anything more about that? Have you?
That about cover. I think that's where we're at right now, at least. So.
Okay. Right. So at least we know that from here on out, we'll also need to address the AppArmor profile. That should be an easy one to restore, and we'll need to do sockets, which could be a
from the checkpoint restart perspective.
Right.
So being able to checkpoint your AppArmor profile.
Right. That should be easy.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of sockets, you really can't do anything for external sockets, right? I mean.
No, there should be an existing plugin to. I mean.
Well, you mean about traffic coming in? You can't really checkpoint what's outside your system.
Right. Like.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say sockets? I actually meant consoles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to add anything to the state of the art for sockets. I think the Creo folks have done a good job with that.
Right.
But they never addressed consoles.
Right.
Yeah, last time I tried with LXC, it was the biggest one I couldn't easily work around, which was serializing the PTS devices and restoring that properly.
Right. I don't think that'll be a big deal to do with a plugin, but it'll take being familiar with Creo, which is what Tycho's achieving now. So I think that's going well, and it's on track. Tycho, yeah. You'll have time the next 2 months to spend on that, right?
Yep, definitely. So.
Yes, Stefan.
On the LXC side, it shouldn't be a major amount of work to actually get Creo working once we have it working standalone. I'm not sure what's the state of getting some kind of library from Creo, or do we just shell out to the actual Creo binary?
I believe they had in their latest version a library.
Okay.
But they wanted feedback on it, which is all the more reason to get going on it.
Yeah. Okay, so that will be better for LXC, but worst case scenario, we'll just shell out to Creo directly. And I guess on our side, all that we'll end up having is like an extra 2 commands to checkpoint and restart a container. So 2 extra API functions and binding entries and probably an LXC checkpoint tool again.
Right.
But that should be it.
Right. And so that the figuring out what to do with the LXC restart tool is the other chunk of work that I didn't write down or mention here. But I mean, since I just say CREU right now, it restarts the processes, and then we'll have to have it somehow reparent itself to an LXC monitor so that the container continues to function after restart as a container. So there's some parentage issues there, but we can work those out.
I have a question for you. So where do you see this feature fitting in with, the rest of the Ubuntu ecosystem, like Juju and all the rest of it? Do you see there being hooks in anywhere to be able to do the checkpoint restart?
Well, like I said, I would expect checkpoint and restart to be 2 functions in the API, exported in all the languages and used with 2 commands, LXC checkpoint and LXC restart. And however anyone wants to use it, they can. Now, I don't know that Juju really has a need for checkpoint and restart. It doesn't migrate things that I know of.
Okay. But where, could you see it? Does it fit in anywhere? Do we need to be interacting with any other team to make sure that features?
So I think the main 2 use cases for CREU is definitely being able to do live migrate of containers and being able to do things like checkpointing all of your containers prior to rebooting a machine and then restarting them afterwards, so that you can keep state on your system across reboots. I don't think there's any integration we should focus on immediately. The most obvious one, I think, would be the LXC OpenStack plugin. Possibly supporting live migrate in there at some point. But I guess Chuck is busy with even getting standard containers working to begin with, so it's probably not a priority here.
Not so anymore.
Wait, so Chuck, when you said not so anymore, you mean you've already got containers working in OpenStack?
I have containers working on a script with Python.
I just wanted to make sure that was clear. But so guys, this is something. So being able to do this CREU, let me use the proper cool term, except for I'm not making it sound very cool. We're trying to have something kind of to show off. You guys have the mini summit in August, and then I also have a mid-sprint, and we're kind of hoping to have, this is what you guys are hoping to have a functioning. Are you hoping to have the console piece in place for that time frame?
I wasn't originally. The goal wasn't to have something to show off so much as to identify what real problems we have,
right.
Because the Parallels folks will be there, the CREU folks, and so we can work with them on overcoming whatever serious issues we have.
Right. I understand your goal isn't necessarily showing off. Yeah, okay. But still, I just wanted to make it clear this is kind of something that we're, in terms of, because some people like to know kind of when things might show up. So this is kind of something we're focused on first half of the cycle right now.
Yes. And then for 14.10 as a deliverable, we ideally would have what we would tag as a tech preview for something that you can play with to see what it's going to look like eventually. But of course, we can't say anything about what odd things, like what MySQL will be doing that we can't checkpoint and things like that.
Right. A lot of it comes down to the individual workloads in regards to what you can checkpoint.
And another thing on our side, is that once we get consoles and the remaining file systems and all that stuff working for checkpoint, then it's technically not really LXC's problem much anymore. It's basically just getting fixes into CREU itself for any workload it can't deal with. But LXC itself wouldn't have to change after that. And
as we found in the discussion today, some of that will come down to convincing the CREU folks that what the thing it's not handling is actually a valid thing to want a checkpoint in a container. So, I mean, it's not like we can just say now we'll hand it off to the CREU folks. We'll have to be involved. But that's good. That's fine.
So, you guys, there's a question on IRC from B. Mulan. Any thoughts on moving from using LXC BR0/bridge to Open Virtual Switch, given excitement use of containers now and larger containers deployment deployments, it would seem that OVS's programmability with lots of advantages to LXC servers.
Okay, so yeah, so the question IRC was actually about to bring it up. I don't think it's something we should do by default because LXC is installed in a lot of cases where you don't need complex networking. And for those, using standard Linux bridges means no extra packages, no extra kernel modules, none of all of that stuff.
Now, it is worth remembering that in general, the OVS bridges are faster than the Linux bridges.
That used to be true.
What's that?
That used to be true. Yeah, initially when we did early testing, I think it was like back in 12 or 4, OVS was definitely faster, even when using the standard Linux bridges with it.
Yeah, but this past summer I tested it and had the same result.
Okay. Because yeah, when I tried on current trusty on my servers, I do over 40 gigabits per second through a standard Linux bridge, which seems to be mostly similar to what you would get through Open vSwitch.
Okay.
And so I think we might want to look into maybe, I don't know, working on some hooks and stuff like that to properly configure Open vSwitch at container startup. But it's not something we should be doing by default.
So do you think that's something that we should do, put on the list as kind of a stretch goal for the cycle, or you think it's something that...
I think it's the kind of thing where we could probably do with more documentation how to use it, maybe extend the server guides to cover Open vSwitch use with LXC, but I don't think we want to do any of that by default.
The hooks. Okay, so we should capture that in the Etherpad to improve our documentation around Open vSwitch.
I mean, usually we try to make it so that sure we ship with LXC BR0 by default, but a lot of users use libvirt bridges or use Open vSwitch bridges on their system. It's just one line change in the config to turn that off and point somewhere else.
Okay, all right. So Serge, continue on.
Moving on. One thing that people seem to want to do is be able to mount file systems from an image in containers. That currently is, in unprivileged containers, completely impossible. And so Seth on the kernel team has spent some time looking into and actually implementing a customization of the loopback code to allow loopback devices to be used in containers, but that would not have addressed the actual mounting still. So now, following up on discussion that resulted from that, we're going to look into some fuse file systems to see if there's anything we can do to... There's Miklos had written something, I think it was Miklos, a few years ago called Mount LO, which was designed to let unprivileged users mount anything over a loopback, or like a loopback. So we want to look into that, but there's nothing. If nothing works, then nothing works. That's so far just an investigative thing.
So
Yes.
have you had a request for that from someone other than Maz and the situation that I created?
Well, that is one of the primary drivers, but yes, there are people who want to be able to build distro images, for instance, like
Right.
Michael, the Fedora LXC maintainer, wants to be able to build Fedora images from the ISO, and that would require also being able to at least mount an ISO image inside the container.
Yeah.
Or somehow read and write it. I mean, in the end, if we end up just using libraries that let you read and write files inside an image, that's fine too. We just want to see what can be done.
I mean, you can basically do that, but the fact is that the kernel is where most network, most file system drivers are actually tested and functional, and
Right. Right. Which is why I like the idea of doing a new Fuse thing where it actually uses the kernel source to build Fuse file systems, so that at least you've got the same tested code base for the actual file system operations.
how would you make that not have the same security issues that?
Well, it would run in user space. It would create. You'd run a user space process, which would have basically the full file system code from the kernel running in user space to process the image.
Oh. Okay. Okay.
It would just be so we wouldn't have to have two copies of the code.
Yeah. Right.
And then we have right now we have quite a few security features in LXC, but if you know what you're doing, they're very useful. But if you're new and you just want to get something done, it can be frustrating or insecure. And so I've considered doing something which is not yet well thought out to do some sort of security profiles based on what you want to do, which could combine some seccomp policies, AppArmor policies, and maybe even unprivileged, tell you whether you should use unprivileged container or not, to allow, if you're using a privileged container, you still need to explicitly allow mounting ext2 file systems or whatever, so you want to allow the minimum that you need, and it'd be nice to have a tool that allows you to, a wizard to help you configure that. I should have asked someone from the security team to be here, but I didn't. The next item is the stacked AppArmor profiles, which I'd really like to have in 14.10, which is what would allow. Yeah?
Right, I had a chat about that. I talked with John 2 weeks ago about that, and he's still saying that basically the same thing as last time, which is that they've got code, it currently has a few shortcomings and issues it's working on. Still planning on getting the feature in 14.10, and possibly backported into the 14.04 kernel as well. It's not completely clear yet what kind of changes is required on the LXC side to actually make that work. We need to create the new AppArmor namespace and all that stuff, which I doubt we can really SRU back to 14.04, but the LXC backport in 14.04 at least should be able to use that feature once the kernel side actually lands.
That would be nice. I'd be surprised. I mean, you backport to the 14.04 kernel that's based on 15 or?
Yeah, I think so. That's what he said. I'm not sure that's going to fly with the SRU team, but it depends. Maybe they plan on doing an AppArmor refresh or something at kernel. Worst case scenario, we'll have the LTS2 topic enablement kernel that should contain it.
So guys, a few comments on IRC. So one, Ubiquity testing also wants mounting ISOs, and S4 she commented to Xenox, if we get Fuse working, there's already an ISO driver for it. And then B. Mulan asked, it was nice seeing Vert Manager now supporting LXC, but it's still pretty limited. Will that get more capable in the future?
So for that part, we can. So that's the usual issue. libvirt LXC is not LXC. It's a completely different project. Vert Manager talks to libvirt, so that's libvirt LXC. That's not the project we're the upstream for. So I'm sure they're working on new features. I just have no idea what they are.
Okay, I'm surprised no one asked what we're talking about with AppArmor stack profiles, but just to clarify, in case anyone wants to ask, what that means is that right now when you start a container, it runs under the container's LXC container default profile. When you run MySQL in there, it stays under that profile. And with stacked profiles, the MySQL in the container would be still running under the container's profile, but also under MySQL's profile. So it would protect the container from MySQL as well as protecting the host from the container. Okay, CG Manager updates. Not too much to say. There's a couple things that we want to do. We want to be able to systemd co-mounts a couple of controllers. Right now, CG Manager, if it starts and finds that C groups are already mounted, it doesn't run because it doesn't want to mess with someone else's configuration. That's not going to fly with systemd, of course. So we're going to have to change that and have it handle the fact that some subsystems may be already co-mounted. And then to avoid having the callers have to decide, so if two subsystems are co-mounted, and the caller says, let's say memory and CPU are co-mounted, and you say, move me in the memory C group to this C group, and then move me in the CPU one, the second one will fail because you're already in the new C group. So to not have the caller have to worry about that, we need to allow specifying multiple controllers in one call. So then you can just say, well, I want to move in memory devices and CPU subsystems, move to this C group. And then whatever ones are not co-mounted, CG Manager will do each one of those. And then in addition to that, also add keywords all and something like all mine, where it just uses all mounted controllers or uses all the mounted controllers that you actually have write access to in the dbus call. And then in addition to that, I just have to examine what we can do in relationship to systemd and then talk with the systemd folks about if we can get all the functionality. So the reason CG Manager exists basically is to allow a clean, simple implementation in LXC of nested containers with C group access without the host having to have any worries about that with respect to C groups. So if we can get what we need from systemd for that, then that's perfect. If not, then we'll need to figure out how they should work together. The next item on the list is the systemd unit jobs. Stefan, you want to say anything about that? Or?
Yeah, just still on the CG Manager side. So my guess on the systemd side is that the best we can hope for is having some kind of raw C group access API, in which case we could have CG Manager use that for writes instead of going straight to the file system. I'm not sure we'll be able to convince the systemd folks to do all of the user namespace and PID namespace comparison stuff that CG Manager does currently. Because the trick that we have to deal with currently with CG Manager is that if you create an unprivileged, nested unprivileged containers, you need to map the right PIDs and UIDs as they go from the sub-container to the sub-container to the container to the host, and figure out whether those UIDs are owned by the actual user who owns the file system entry.
So for example, if you're root in a container, your user ID 100,000, for instance, on the host, then you've got privilege over UID 5 in your container, but on the host, user ID 100,000 doesn't have privilege over user ID 100,005. And so CG Manager does the work to figure out, based on the UID maps, whether it is privileged over that or not. So it's true, it seems unlikely that we would get systemd to be willing to do that stuff. But on the other hand, it is what is needed to allow delegation. Of course, systemd doesn't really want to do delegation and is happy with simply saying that containers shouldn't be doing that stuff.
So if you can't get the do delegation in systemd, what are you guys going to do?
So there are currently two ways. The first is what I mentioned earlier, which is to just have systemd give us an API that's low level enough that we can just use it to do direct access to the C group hierarchy while still have it systemd track what we are doing, which in theory should be the best of both worlds, because systemd can still claim to be the one and only C group manager on the system, can still get the kind of global picture of what's going on, and CG Manager can still do exactly what it does today, and everyone will be happy. If that doesn't work, what we would end up doing is simply have both of them write directly to the file system. So systemd will write and create the C groups for all of the systemd units, and CG Manager will run and create all the C groups for the LXC and libvirt entries. Okay. Which is not a problem per se. I mean, it works fine. It's just that there are some corner cases that one of the manager might at some point want to do. Say if you want to dynamically allocate CPU time or CPU resources, not knowing what else exists in this group hierarchy might be a problem for you. But yeah, in other case, we won't get stuck. I mean, worst case scenario, we just have both of them write directly to the file system and done.
So hopefully at Plumbers in October, we'll be able to talk to the systemd guys.
But this means talking at Plumbers means this isn't like kind of something in the 14.10 time frame that you guys are.
No, so for 14.10, I expect we'll basically fix CG Manager so it can actually start alongside systemd. And that's it. I mean, currently there's no clear plan for even having systemd as a default in 14.10 regardless. So that should only become a big problem with 15.04 if we actually do the switch at that point.
Yeah, we have a session later this week to talk more about systemd and the plans with regards to server.
But yeah, currently the main focus on the work regarding systemd is to make CG Manager start on it, start under it. So the co-mounting issue that Serge mentioned earlier is exactly what we need to make that happen first.
Okay. So sorry, Serge, I kind of interrupted what you were saying about Plumbers.
No, that was it. That's when we can hopefully discuss with the systemd folks. Yeah, so Stefan, did you want to talk now about the
systemd unit? Yeah, maybe. I've not really been looking into that, but I think Martin has been finding a bunch of bugs. So currently the problem is that, well, not really a problem, but the upstart jobs do a whole lot more things than the sys5 init and systemd jobs do. Like we actually create select CBR0, we configure AppArmor, we set up the networking, we set up DHCP, we do all that stuff. The sys5 init job doesn't do any of that. And the systemd unit is completely broken at the moment and doesn't even start. So the systemd unit at least was fixed last week, I think, or this morning for the stable branch. Anyway, we've got fixes in there, but we still need to figure out whether all distros want to do the want to shape LXCBR0 as we do in Ubuntu, or what should happen upstream there, so that we have some similar experience in Ubuntu whether you use Upstart or systemd.
Okay, cool. All right, what's next?
Oh, I guess that's another of my items, maybe. Yeah, so image-based workflow. As we said this morning, we're starting doing LXC images using the LXC download template with the LXC 1.0 release that got into Trusty. That's working pretty well, but now we are considering, still as part of improving the user experience, a few plans to make a more user-friendly tool to manage LXC that's probably closer to Docker in the way it works, where you don't have like 50 commands to 50 fine-grained commands like we have currently to tweak every single bit of the thing, but instead go with, say, just doing, we only support images with that tool. That tool can create, remaster, publish new images. Yeah, basically making the whole image workflow much easier for people and making it so that they can actually create their own image and distribute them on their own network, so that they can centrally create images for all of the things they need to deploy and then just deploy from there.
So to take a step back, originally LXC used templates to create rootfs for your containers because there are a lot of things you had to do with all distros to make them able to run in containers. We kept using that for a long time after, I think it was around Maverick timeframe that we decided that's it, we're going to make Ubuntu run as a first-class citizen in containers. By Precise, it was definitely the case that it was doable. But the templates kept working, so we kept using them. What happened was that for privileged containers, we want to have users who aren't root at all be able to create and run containers. And they can't run the bootstrap, they can't create devices, they can't do a bunch of things. And so to make it easier for unprivileged users, Stefan came out with the download template, which downloads pre-generated images of containers. And so this kind of, I think most people at this point probably are using now the download template. I know I use it almost all the time now. And heck, if you're not using that, you might be using the Ubuntu Cloud one, but few people actually wait around for the bootstrap. And so I think moving on to a tool not replacing LXC Create, but on top of it, which only does download templates, or only does image, it allows us to move on cleanly to an image-based workflow then, where it's...
Yeah, it also makes the whole LXC Create experience a bit more consistent, because one of the issues we have currently is that every single template has its different set of options, which is slightly annoying. The download template basically gives you the same very limited set of options for all templates, but at least it's consistent. There are still some bits we probably should work on, like the actual username and passwords varies for all templates. Some need to use sudo, so some don't. That's the kind of thing I would probably want to rework as we work on a single tool that only does images, so that we basically specify all images that are published, at least on our public server, we need to have the same behavior. They all need to either, well, probably not ship with any account, and then have the client either just do LXC attach, so not requiring any account anyway, or creating an account at that point, possibly with just setting up SSH public keys or that kind of stuff. Because currently having to figure out what template did I use, what are the actual credentials for that thing. I think it's the CentOS and Fedora templates now, where they require that you change your password the first time you enter them. The Ubuntu template doesn't, but requires you to use sudo. It's a bit messy at the moment, and we should definitely spend some time making that even cleaner.
Yep. And was that it? Oh, well, I'd also written down the syslog namespace. That's just nice to have, mainly because I don't see myself having time to address it. But right now, if you're really trying to if something goes wrong in a container and you're trying to debug it, and you decide to look at your host syslog, you might find that you've got a jumble of unreadable messages. Messages from different containers and from the host will just get interleaved character by character.
Oh, really? So they're not. I was going to ask you if the messages were tagged with, the container, but you're saying actually character by character. It's all.
Yeah. So you can't. Yeah. I've spent long periods of time trying to decipher some of those and just been unable to.
That's a huge benefit.
Yeah. The issue is that usually if you do, say, add a new network device in a container, it's going to be seen by all the other containers and by the host, and they all write to the kernel log buffer, and it turns into a massive mess because you've got like 50 processes writing the same buffer at the same time. So just had a quick look, because we're saying that a lot of people are using the image-based workflow. And yeah, it looks like for yesterday we had 1,791 different IPs accessing the image server.
Wow.
So yeah, quite a few users.
Your ISP is going to get upset.
No, it won't.
Oh, cool.
That sure made Stefan smile. I'm not sure why. It seems like there might be something fishy going on with his ISP. I don't really know.
They're used to me.
So that's it for our list. Was there anything else that anyone else wanted to discuss?
Maybe worth mentioning the what's the current status of LXC and OpenStack?
There is no status right now. I'm working on it.
Well, I mean, I think earlier, Chuck, you mentioned that it's working, but we're trying to make improvements. Correct? Is that what you mean by node status?
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. When do you think you might have a status update?
I'm shooting for August to have something public.
Okay.
All right.
Anything else?
Scott, is there anything else?
I don't have
Do you have any
anything.
other
No.
questions? Okay. All right. Well, thanks, you guys. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, you guys are on #LX container if there's questions, and there's mailing lists and all that. So, and then we've still got one more session on Thursday is where it's currently scheduled, where you guys are going to do a tutorial and show off some of the features of user namespaces. So stay tuned to that. And tomorrow there's a using Juju with LXC session that's worth for folks to watch if they're interested in containers. Thanks, you guys. Have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.